As Yellowjackets kicks off its third season, we're immediately thrust back into the Canadian wilderness, where the survivors of the 1996 plane crash have been stuck for nearly a year. The change in seasons marks a significant shift. Snow is melting, leaves are sprouting, and the charred remnants of their once abandoned cabin have given way to a more settled, albeit uneasy, community. The show's atmosphere, both literal and metaphorical, continues to pulse with a sense of impending dread, but the contrast between the harshness of nature and the simmering tensions among the group brings a new layer of complexity. In the wilderness timeline, the survivors are no longer just trying to stay alive, they've moved into the realm of survival and making a life for themselves, albeit a chaotic one. The once imminent threat of starvation and exposure has been somewhat alleviated, allowing them to begin working on the hierarchy of needs that most people take for granted. In this makeshift village, there are actual celebrations. We see them playing a game of solstice capture the bone, which, while macabre in its own right, is also a small moment of levity. There's a rabbit and duck farm, a small, unorthodox attempt at building a sustainable future. For a moment, it almost feels like they could have a semblance of normalcy again, almost, but of course, this being Yellowjackets, normalcy is not on the menu. As the group tries to create something resembling a community, the darker aspects of their personalities rise to the surface. Shauna, Sophie Nalise, still haunted by the trauma of her baby's stillbirth, is angrier and more volatile than ever. The quasi-religion that treats the wilderness as a sentient being has fully taken root, with some of the survivors believing that they are beholden to it, the elusive and perhaps supernatural force of the forest. These religious and spiritual undercurrents are adding a potent, dangerous layer to their already fragile mental states. In the midst of all this is Coach Scott, Stephen Kruger, who has turned into a symbol of resistance against the feral transformation of the girls. Having lost his leg, he's increasingly repelled by the girls' descent into savagery. His disappearance after the cabin fire last season left a hole, and his absence in the community underscores the growing divide between those who cling to any semblance of order and those who have embraced the untamed spirit of the wilderness. The show's portrayal of psychological and supernatural unease continues to shine, as paranoia, cult-like belief systems, and human desperation all play pivotal roles in the drama. This shift in the survival narrative allows the show to explore some deeper questions about human nature. What happens when people are pushed to the brink, when their morality is tested by hunger, fear, and the struggle to stay alive? It's in these moments that Yellowjackets is at its most compelling, offering a lens into how far these women will go to survive, not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally. We see flashes of their former selves, normal teenage quirks, like one girl jokingly singing "I'm too sexy" in a cave during a traumatic moment, but even these moments of levity serve to highlight the depths of their internal turmoil. On the flip side, the modern-day timeline, set in the 2020s, feels curiously flat. After the events of Season 2, where we witnessed Natalie's, Juliette Lewis, tragic death via a fentanyl overdose and the fallout from the group's collective guilt, you'd expect the present-day storyline to be charged with a more urgent sense of reckoning. Instead, it feels almost like the survivors are going through the motions. Sure, there's a funeral for Natalie in the premiere, but beyond that, the storylines remain stagnant. In particular, the relationships between the adult survivors feel disjointed and forced. The attempts to pair them off, such as a rekindled romance between Ty, Tawny Cypress, and Van, Lauren Ambrose, feel more like filler than anything meaningful. Ty's breakdown and Van's cancer diagnosis have certainly created a sense of vulnerability, but the narrative doesn't explore the consequences of their past trauma with enough depth to make the reunion feel earned. Similarly, Shauna's relationship with her daughter, Callie, Sarah Desjardins, has been a highlight, but it too feels somewhat underdeveloped. Callie's inclusion as a character is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's refreshing to see the generational dynamics play out between Shauna and her daughter, particularly as Callie is brought into the fold of her parents' dark secrets. On the other, Callie is still very much a side note to the main, unresolved issues. Perhaps most problematic is the absence of urgency. The survivors, despite their complicated history, don't seem to have much driving them forward. The specter of it, whether it's a supernatural entity or a collective delusion, looms over the wilderness scenes, but in the modern timeline, its presence is barely felt. The characters' attempts to deal with the aftermath of Natalie's death, Misty's, Christina Ricci, role in the murder, and the tension from earlier plotlines like the cover-up of a police officer's poisoning are all left hanging in the air. Instead, we get a mid-season twist that attempts to inject new energy into the storyline, but it doesn't quite land as expected, leaving us to wonder if the modern-day narrative is just trying to catch up with the intensity of the flashbacks. What Yellowjackets continues to excel at is the slow-burn tension that builds from its characters' emotional and psychological unraveling. The show's strength lies not just in the horror of their circumstances, but in the way it captures how trauma shapes behavior. It's most effective when it dives deep into individual experiences, how the past haunts the present, how the wilderness molds these young women into something new and dangerous. The tension between normalcy and primal instincts is the heart of the show, and in the wilderness, it's clear that the survivors are far from whole. They may have found a form of survival, but their psyches are still deeply fractured. In conclusion, Yellowjackets Season 3 delivers the kind of dark, psychologically charged drama that fans have come to expect, but the adult timeline is lagging behind, unable to match the intensity of the wilderness storyline. With both narratives struggling to find their footing, it's clear that the show's future will hinge on finding balance between these two worlds, and whether it can dig deeper into the complicated web of trauma, guilt, and survival that holds its characters together and tears them apart.